What's up everyone? Today we're going to take a look at the Marvel Legends 6-inch Renew Your Vows 2-pack of Spider-Man aka Peter Parker and Spinneret aka Mary Jane. I'm super excited to be doing this review. I had heard rumors that it would have been out next week, but today it just came in stock at my friendly neighborhood collector store Robo, so of course I picked it up. And at this point I'm still surprised to have it in hand. Before we go into this review, I just want to say please like, share, comment, subscribe, and also hit the super thanks button. All engagement is appreciated. So let's go ahead and take a look at this blind box. There's no way of telling how the figures look like on the inside, so I just walked into the store, picked it up, and it was one of the fastest toy shopping experiences. I just hope the paint is up to standard. At the top of the box, we have that Spider-Man 60-year anniversary logo. Down to the bottom, some product information as well as a little bit of Spidey over here. Down to the left side of the box, and that's where we really see the artist's artwork coming out. Spider-Man on top and Spinneret below. On the back of the box, they show you the two action figures as well as their accessories. There are no character descriptions this time, but there are product information at the bottom. And moving on to that last side, this time instead of repeating the artwork, we see the renders of the action figure. So let's go ahead and get this box open. So it's rather unflattering, but you have the two action figures in their own bags, supported by cardboard insert, and also individual bags for their accessories. The figures are held quite firmly in place by the cardboard, so you would have to pull those cardboard inserts apart in order to slide the figures out of those inserts. Doing the same over here for Mary Jane. Getting Spider-Man out of his baggie. And he comes with a Peter Parker hit, two wall crawling hands, a left twip hand, and a right fist. Getting Spinneret out of her bag and getting her accessories out of the baggie. She comes with a Mary Jane hit, two female wall crawling hands, a left fist, and a right twipping hand. First up, we take a look at Spinneret's alternate hands, and they're all cast in a white plastic. I noticed a much finer work in terms of the molding this time. There's not a lot of stray plastic on the fist. You can clearly see her knuckles. For her twipping hand, you can also see her individually defined fingers, as well as some subtle sculpting for the fingernails. Her wall crawling hands are similarly cast in the white plastic. Once again, also sharp molding detail with the lines on her palms as well as her fingers. All her hands are articulated inwards as well as outwards. In packaging, she comes with the left twipped hand as well as the right fist. So her alternate right twipping hand and left fist also pop on just fine, as do her wall crawling hands. And these hands will also be a good option to have a more relaxed pose with her hands by her side. Her alternate head pops onto the figure just fine, and it is exactly the same sculpt as the head sculpt that came from the retro Gwen Stacy figure. But even though it's the same sculpt, there are some subtle differences, which I attribute to the improved tooling at the Hasbro factory. So even though they have the same sculpt, you can see that the new Mary Jane head has a sharper chin as well as a more defined nose. Her facial features in general are also sharper, including her cheekbones. You can also now see, with the improved dot matrix digital printing for the paintwork on her face, her red eyebrows and red lipstick are really sharply applied, as well as her bright blue eyes. And you can see the definition in her eyelashes, which is really eye-popping. And even though they have the same sculpt, this new paintwork makes Mary Jane have her girl next door charm. While I will say the previous head sculpt had a more sexier look to it. The one downside now is that her red hair no longer has that black wash applied to it. So it looks flatter, and the sculpted details and the strands in her waves don't really stand out that much. I think Hasbro definitely could have added some wash to this hair sculpt, because the sculpt is pretty great in the first place. Sculpt wise, I think Spinneret is on the Shriek body mold with a different upper torso. And of course, she's got her own head sculpt, as well as those cuffs on the top of her boots. Her head sculpt is cast in the flash tone plastic, and she's got a smiling expression on her face behind that mask. The red, white, and black paint for her mask is all sharply applied, and I also observed the dot matrix printing technique for her lipstick as well as her teeth. The paint applications on her face are pretty close to perfect, all very sharp and well defined. The black lining around her eye could possibly go closer to the middle of her mask, as you can see the sculpted detail over here, but I think that's a small nitpick. Her hair is now styled into a bun, so there's good sculpting work for the bangs on the front, the curls on her side, as well as the textures that go into the bun on the back. Her torso piece is actually cast in red plastic, and then white paint is applied for the elements of her outfit, as well as the web lines and the spider logo. All the web lines appear to be really sharp, no scuffing that I can observe, so that's really nice work. Her shoulder piece is also a red plastic with white paint for the underarms, and then also white paint for the web lining. The rest of her arm is the white plastic with no paint, but they do have the pinless joint system. On the back of the figure, there is an additional hit of red paint for the big spider logo. Also really sharp and defined. Zero complaints over here. In fact, I think it is really well executed. And we move down to her hip as well as her leg area. That hip piece this time is actually cast in a white plastic, along with the rest of the legs also in white plastic. The hip pieces then have an additional hit of red paint, and then the white paint on top of the red paint for the web lines. Once again, also really sharp, and the red paint also matches the red plastic on her torso quite well. Her knees also similarly have that pinless joint system, and looking at the cuffs of her shoes, they are cast in a soft, flexible white plastic, red paint for the web lines, also really sharp. This separate piece tends to move around as you pose her, and that can get a bit distracting once they move too far away from her ankles. And finally at her ankles, there's red paint, and then the white web lines on top of that, while finally her feet are a red plastic with the white web lines on top of them. For articulation, her head is on a ball hinge, so her head goes all the way around, also getting some sideways tilting going on. The hinge means she's able to look down quite a good bit, as well as up. Swivel hinge at the shoulders for 360 spin, and they do come out quite a good bit. Swivel at the bicep for 360 spin. Double hinged pinless elbows, very good range. Swivel hinge at the wrist for 360 spin and articulating in as well as out. Mid-torso ball joint for spinning all the way around. There's also quite a bit of sideways tilting. Her forward ab crunch goes about that far, which is a little bit more than regular Marvel Legends females, and she does get quite a good bit of backward bend as well. It's nice to see the web line detail continuing into that torso joint. She's got ball jointed hips that go out just about that much, as well as, no problems, forward and backward. She's got a swivel at the thigh, double jointed pinless knees for a very good range. She's got ankle tilt upwards as well as downwards, and this joint is quite stiff. And finally ankle pivot outwards as well as inwards. She's on Marvel Legends standard articulation, so you can certainly get her into web slinging poses easily. She's definitely fun to play with, especially with those alternate hands. And it's worth pointing out that now with wall crawling hands, you have way more options in terms of posing this Spinneret. I will say however that she's not on the same level of posability as Spider-Man obviously, and she cannot get into that 4-point crouching pose. And now we have a look at Spider-Man's accessories. Once again, the sculpting appears to be much sharper. I think these are old sculpts, but once again, the tooling is improved. So you can see his clearly defined fingers on both of his hands, as well as the sculpted lines on his fingers. And also, finally, this mold of Spider-Man gets his wall-crawling hands, which were of course glaringly missing from the retro-carded Spider-Man figure. Once again, also very sharp details. You can see the lines in his palms, as well as on his fingers. All hands are cast in a red plastic, with the black paint for the web lining. All hands are also articulated the same way, being able to go inwards, as well as outwards. In packaging, both figures have their hands mirroring each other. So with his alternate hands, you get a full set of fists, web shooting twip hands, And of course, finally he gets his wall crawling hands, which are actually really versatile for different poses. Spider-Man also comes with an alternate Peter Parker head sculpt that of course pops onto the figure just fine. It is exactly the same sculpt once again, with the Peter Parker head sculpt that came with the Spider-Man and Mary Jane 2-pack. But also it has those tooling improvements. So you can see that his chin as well as his cheekbones are sharper. He's also got a dot matrix digital printing technique for the paint applications on his face. Now you can see that on his eyebrows, very sharply printed eyes as well, and also some coloring for his lips. So this head sculpt ends up looking sharper and more expressive than the previous version. He's also got brown plastic on top, and that's sculpted for the waves and textures in his hair. And it also appears to be applied and attached to his head better, looking more convincing as hair on his head. In terms of sculpt, Spider-Man is exactly the same mold as the retro-carded Spider-Man. That mold has been reused many times to good effect on Ben Reilly's Spider-Man as well as Symbiote Spider-Man. However, there are differences on this new Spider-Man. And those differences are in colors, tooling, and some of those differences are pretty obvious, and also kind of smaller details. The big thing now is of course improved tooling. So now he's got completely pinless joints from head to toe, because literally he has toe articulation now. His head sculpt is also new, and it's also much more proportional to his body. The previous Spider-Man head sculpts seem to be on the smaller side when compared to the size of their bodies. For his color scheme, he's now got a brighter shade of red, but a darker shade of blue. So I don't think the head sculpts and hands are swappable between these two Spider-Man figures because of the different shades of red. Ben Reilly, however, has a shade of red somewhere in between, so we might have better luck doing some head swaps, which we will see later on. Now we zoom into his finer details. His head is cast in a red plastic with a smooth sculpt all over. He's got large expressive eyes with white and black paint sharply applied. The web lining on his head is also very sharply applied. However, I do notice the pattern just slightly slanted to the left side of the figure on my copy. It's not such a big deal, but it's there. The rest of the head is also smooth, and the web lining connects all over. So that's really fine work for the web lining. Now we move down to his torso. I actually quite like that big expressive spider logo, and the web lining is also really neat all over his chest. His upper torso is a red plastic with the blue paint down the sides of his torso, but the lower torso and waist area, this is all blue plastic with red paint down the middle as well as his belt detail. Once again, the web lining is all really sharp, and they all line up all over the front of his torso. The mixed use of blue and red plastics and paints is not really noticeable. That's because all those colors of different paints and plastics all match up almost perfectly. His shoulder to his arm as well as his hands are all cast in a red plastic with blue paint for the insides of his outfit detail. I'd just like to bring your attention to the bicep cut. It is now a straight cut across his bicep as compared to the previous tooling where it's got a more organic looking cut. While this cut looks neat, it does come across as looking a bit unnatural. And also, the gap in that bicep cut is more obvious compared to the previous version. It's a subtle difference, but it doesn't bug me much. Moving down his arm, his elbow piece is cast in a blue plastic. And right now there is also an improvement in this elbow joint. Just observe that there is now a notch over here. When on the previous retro-carded Spider-Man, there was no notch. And that meant that his elbow was limited to a 90-degree bend. I actually managed to remove some plastic and create that notch on my Ben Reilly Spider-Man. So he's got improved range in that elbow. You can check out my modification video linked in the description below. But now with this new Spider-Man elbow design, you probably wouldn't need to do that anymore, because as you can see, he's got already more than 90-degree elbow bend, which was what my modification achieved after completion. I also like to point out one thing about the elbow, and you can see the blue paint applications line up almost perfectly with that blue plastic in his elbow. So the line is almost perfectly straight when viewed from the front, and that really pleases my OCD. And now without any visible pins, you won't have to suffer the unsightly red pins showing up on the insides of the blue arms. Now moving on to the back of the figure, he's got a big red spider logo, once again also very sharply painted, and the spider legs also are painted onto his butterfly joints on his shoulders, so the legs do kind of extend and shorten as you move his butterfly joints. And now onto the rest of the lower body and his legs. It's all cast in the dark blue plastic, so there's no paint detail over here. And to illustrate the engineering improvement of the hidden pins, you can see that the red pin on Ben Reilly's Spider-Man over here is super obvious on the inside of the leg, while we don't see any of that on the new Spider-Man, so that is really pleasing. And now onto his boots, and they are cast in the red plastic with the really sharp applications of black paint for the web lining. For articulation, his head is on a double ball dumbbell joint, so that means you can spin his head all the way around. He also gets just a little bit of sideways tilting. He can look down that far, as well as up that much, but then you're going to expose a little bit of gap in his neck. He's got butterfly joints at his shoulders, so he pulls his arms forward quite a good deal, as well as backward pretty well. He's got a swivel hinge at his shoulders, so they go all the way around, as well as coming out that far. Upper bicep swivel for 360 spin. Pinless double jointed elbows now that go quite a good range beyond 90 degrees. Swivel hinge at the wrist for 360 spin, as well as articulating in and out. He's got a mid-torso ball joint, so you can spin him all the way around, getting some good sideways tilt as well. When you're going to look at his forward and backward bend, it's good to consider that he's got a hinge at his waist. So that means fantastic range forward and also very good range backward. He's got drop down ball joints at his hips, so they drop like that and they go out sideways, but still not getting the full split. No problems forward and backward. Swivel at the thigh for 360 spin. Double jointed pinless knees, very good range. Swivel at the calf for 360 spin. Ankle tilt upwards as well as downwards. Ankle pivot outwards and inwards. And lastly, he's also got the brand new pinless toe hinge that goes upwards as well as downwards. We've already gotten a couple of Spider-Man in this body mold and articulation scheme, so we all know that the articulation is pretty awesome, and you can get him into many iconic Spider-Man fighting and web slinging poses. Now we also have the additional toe hinge, so we can have him flex his toes for more expressive feet. And if you want to make your own homemade, bendable, posable spider webs, you can also refer to that same video that I have linked in the description below. And even though the previous body mold, as you can see over here on Ben Reilly's Spider-Man, already does quite a good 4-point crouch, I think that the toe hinge on the new Spider-Man definitely makes it look more natural, but I'm not sure if that's really a lot of improvement. You guys let me know what you think in the comments below. And now we're gonna try some head swaps with the Ben Reilly Spider-Man as well as Pizza Spider-Man. Despite the different shades of red on the two Spider-Man, I think that the head sculpts do work. And this is a good option if you want a more classic looking head sculpt for Spider-Man. Now swapping the heads with Pizza Spider-Man, once again the shades of red are also close enough to fudge. The Pizza Spider-Man head looks okay on the new body, but the new head looks a little too big on Pizza Spider-Man. And just for fun, I do have some extra Spider-Man heads to try on. These are actually from the knockoff Mayfax action figure. These spare heads were kindly passed to me by my buddy Terry, so shout out to him. Of course, I improved on the web lining with my own Gundam panel markers. And I also dremeled the holes in the heads so that they would fit the Marvel Legends ball joints. And this is what he looks like with the head with the bigger eyes. I think the shade of red is almost a perfect match. The head sculpt looks good, but maybe a little small for the body. Moving that head onto Ben Reilly's Spider-Man and also using the other head on this new Spider-Man, I think it still looks great as well, but maybe just a little small. Spider-Man stands at about 6 3/8 of an inch, and that's just over 16 centimeters, while Spinneret stands at 6 1/8 of an inch, and that's about 15.5 centimeters. And here we are comparing them with a bunch of Spider-Verse characters of different sculpts, heights, and colors. It is really cool that we have such a wide range of Spider-Verse characters to display. And of course, Spider-Man's universe is only complete when you put him against all his villains. So here's just a couple of them for size. And here they are with the Avengers team. For comparisons with other lines, here they are with some G.I. Joe's Classified series and some Star Wars Black series. This is a phenomenal Marvel Legends 2-pack. The improved tooling and engineering pushes already great sculpting and articulation to the next level. Paint applications are very clean and sharp, so these figures look good from all angles and are wonderful to pose in hand. I highly recommend this 2-pack, and this Spider-Man is quite close to the perfect Marvel Legends representation of him. Please like and share this video, let me know what you think in the comments below, subscribe to this channel, and even hit the super thanks button. Thanks for watching, take care and stay safe.